The fluorescent lights in Sunset Ridge Hospital's administrative wing hummed with their usual persistent buzz, casting that familiar sterile glow across the polished linoleum floors. I'd grown accustomed to the sound over my 3 years as finance director here in Golden Valley, Oregon. But lately, something felt different about the rhythm of this place. My name is Taylor Hall, and at 32, I'd worked my way up from a junior accounting position to overseeing the financial operations of one of Oregon's most respected regional medical centers. Sunset Ridge served a community of nearly 50,000 residents, and our reputation for both clinical excellence and fiscal responsibility had always been something I took pride in maintaining. The morning shift change was underway as I made my way through the corridors, my badge scanner beeping softly at each secured door. Nurses clustered around workstations, their conversations a mix of patient updates and weekend plans. The familiar sounds of monitors beeping, phones ringing, and the gentle whoosh of automatic doors created the symphony I'd come to associate with healing and hope. But over the past few weeks, I'd noticed subtle changes in the patterns that governed our daily operations. Small discrepancies in overtime reports that didn't quite align with staffing schedules. Vendor payments that seemed to process faster than usual through our Epic financial system. Nothing dramatic enough to raise immediate red flags, but enough to create a persistent itch of concern in the back of my mind. Monica Patterson, our step-down unit nurse manager, had been particularly helpful during our recent budget reviews. She'd volunteered to assist with vendor verification processes, staying late to help reconcile invoices that had been backing up due to our understaffed accounting department. Her dedication had been remarkable, especially considering the demanding nature of her clinical responsibilities. Monica had been with Sunset Ridge for nearly 8 years, having transferred from Portland General when her husband took a position with the local school district. She'd quickly established herself as someone who understood both the clinical and business sides of healthcare operations. When our previous finance assistant left unexpectedly, Monica had stepped in to help bridge the gap, learning our procurement systems with impressive speed. The trust between us had developed naturally. She understood the pressures of maintaining quality patient care while managing tight budgets, and I appreciated having someone with clinical experience who could help translate the real-world impact of our financial decisions. When the board implemented new performance evaluation processes that determined annual bonuses, Monica had been instrumental in helping design metrics that fairly reflected both clinical outcomes and operational efficiency. Her suggestions had seemed thoughtful and well-researched. She'd proposed streamlined approval processes for routine vendor payments, arguing that faster processing would improve our relationships with suppliers and potentially secure better pricing terms. The logic had been sound, and her willingness to take on additional administrative responsibilities had been a genuine relief during our busiest quarters. But this morning, as I reviewed the latest batch of processed invoices, something caught my attention. A series of payments to medical supply vendors I didn't immediately recognize, all approved through the expedited process Monica had helped establish. The amounts weren't enormous, but they were consistent, appearing monthly with clockwork precision. I pulled up the approval logs in our system, expecting to see the usual pattern of department head authorizations. Instead, I found something that made my coffee grow cold in my hands. Multiple approvals bearing my electronic signature, processed during times when I'd been in budget meetings or off-site at board presentations. The timestamp on one particular approval showed my login being used at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when I'd been home with the flu, barely able to get out of bed, let alone access hospital systems remotely. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through more entries, each one deepening the growing pit in my stomach. Someone had been using my credentials to authorize payments, and the pattern suggested this had been happening for months. The morning sun streamed through my office window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny question marks. Outside, Golden Valley was waking up to another ordinary day, but inside these walls, I was beginning to realize that nothing about our recent operations had been ordinary at all. The phone on my desk rang, startling me from my discovery. Monica's voice came through the speaker, warm and familiar as always. "Taylor, do you have a few minutes this morning? I wanted to go over some vendor contracts that need renewal, and I think I've found some opportunities for cost savings." I stared at my computer screen, at the impossible approvals bearing my name, and felt the foundation of trust I'd built over 3 years begin to crack beneath my feet. "Of course, Monica. Come on up whenever you're ready," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. As I waited for her arrival, I quickly saved screenshots of the suspicious approvals to a secure folder. 3 years of working alongside Monica Thompson had taught me to appreciate her efficiency and dedication to the step-down unit. She'd been instrumental in streamlining our vendor approval process, often staying late to ensure everything was properly documented. Her attention to detail had earned her recognition from administration, and she'd become my go-to person for complex billing questions. Monica had joined Sunset Ridge shortly after I'd been promoted to finance director. Fresh from a larger hospital system in Portland, she'd brought innovative ideas about workflow optimization that had impressed everyone from the CNO to the board members. When she'd volunteered to help coordinate the performance evaluation process that determined bonuses, I'd been grateful for her initiative. The soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Monica entered with her usual professional smile, carrying a thick folder of documents. Her scrubs were immaculate despite being 4 hours into her shift, and her badge hung perfectly aligned on her chest. "I've been reviewing our quarterly vendor spending," she began, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Some of these contracts haven't been competitively bid in over 2 years. I think we could save significant money by exploring alternatives." I nodded, watching her carefully as she opened the folder. Her movements were precise, practiced, exactly as they'd always been. Nothing in her demeanor suggested anything unusual, yet the on my computer screen told a different story. "That's excellent initiative," I said. "Before we dive into that, though, I wanted to ask you about something I noticed in the approval logs." A flicker of something crossed her face, so brief I might have imagined it. "Oh? What kind of issue?" "Some approvals showing my electronic signature during times when I wasn't in the building. I'm wondering if there might be a system glitch we need IT to investigate." Monica's expression remained perfectly neutral. "That does sound concerning. Which approvals specifically?" I turned my monitor toward her, showing one of the suspicious entries. "This one from last Tuesday night, for instance. I was homesick that entire day." She leaned, studying the screen with apparent concern. "How strange. Could someone else have used your login credentials? Maybe we should check if your password was compromised." Her suggestion was logical, helpful even, but something about the way she'd immediately jumped to that explanation, without first expressing surprise or asking more questions, felt rehearsed. "That's possible," I agreed. "I'll definitely follow up with IT security. In the meantime, I'm going to review all recent approvals to see if there are other anomalies." "Smart approach," Monica said, closing her folder. "Actually, maybe we should postpone the vendor review until you get this sorted out. We want to make sure all our processes are secure." After she left, I spent the next hour diving deeper into the approval logs. The pattern became clearer with each entry I examined. The suspicious approvals always occurred during times when I had documented alibis, meetings, conferences, sick days. Someone had been very careful to choose moments when my absence could be verified. The vendors receiving these payments were legitimate companies, but when I called to verify the services, I discovered discrepancies. Invoices for supplies that were never delivered, maintenance contracts for equipment we didn't own, consulting fees for services that were never provided. By lunchtime, I had identified over 30 suspicious transactions spanning 8 months. The total amount exceeded $40,000, not enough to trigger automatic auditing flags, but substantial enough to represent serious fraud. I was printing documentation when Peter Williams from IT knocked on my door. "Monica Thompson asked me to check on a potential security breach with your login credentials," he said, settling his laptop on my desk. "Actually, that's perfect timing," I replied. "I've been finding some concerning patterns in the approval system." Peter's analysis confirmed my worst fears. My login credentials had been accessed from Monica's workstation on multiple occasions, always during times when I was verifiably elsewhere. The access logs showed a sophisticated understanding of our security protocols, someone who knew exactly how to cover their tracks. "This is definitely unauthorized access," Peter concluded. Whoever did this had to have your password and knowledge of your schedule. They were careful to avoid triggering our concurrent login alerts by only accessing the system when you were guaranteed to be offline. The afternoon brought another disturbing discovery. While reviewing the performance evaluation database that Monica had helped manage, I found subtle alterations to bonus calculations. Staff members who'd received lower evaluations had their scores mysteriously improved just before bonus determinations, while others had been downgraded. The pattern suggested someone was manipulating the system for personal gain. Catherine Rodriguez from Human Resources stopped by around 3 o'clock, her expression troubled. "Taylor, I need to discuss something sensitive with you. We've received some concerning feedback about the bonus distribution process." She explained that several nurses had privately questioned why their bonuses didn't match their performance reviews. Others had expressed confusion about receiving bonuses they felt they hadn't earned. The complaints had been subtle, almost apologetic, but consistent enough to raise red flags. "The staff trust the evaluation process because Monica's been so transparent about it," Catherine continued. "But these discrepancies are making people uncomfortable. They're starting to wonder if there's favoritism involved." As Catherine spoke, I realized the full scope of what had been happening. Monica hadn't just been stealing money through fake vendor approvals, she'd been manipulating the bonus system, possibly directing funds to herself or allies while shortchanging others. The final piece fell into place when I discovered that Monica had been listed as an emergency contact for several of the suspicious vendor accounts. Cross-referencing the addresses revealed that 2 of the companies were registered to a property she owned outside Golden Valley. By 5 o'clock, I had assembled a comprehensive file of bank records, login logs, vendor documentation, and bonus discrepancies, all pointed to a systematic scheme orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of our financial systems and administrative processes. The woman I trusted to help streamline our operations, who'd volunteered for additional responsibilities and earned recognition for her dedication, had been systematically defrauding the hospital for months. She'd used my credentials to authorize payments to her own shell companies while manipulating staff bonuses to cover her tracks. As I locked the in my office safe, I realized that tomorrow would bring one of the most difficult conversations of my career. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial loss. Monica had violated not just hospital policy, but the trust of every colleague who'd worked alongside her, believing in her commitment to patient care and institutional integrity. The evening shift was beginning, as I finally prepared to leave. Through my office window, I could see Monica at the nurses' station, chatting with colleagues, her demeanor as professional and friendly as always. She looked up and waved when she noticed me watching, that same warm smile that had made her such a valued team member. But now I knew the truth behind that smile, and tomorrow everything would change. The next morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I'd barely slept, rehearsing conversations and reviewing the one final time. By 7 a.m., I was in Chief Administrator Peter Thompson's office, the manila folder containing Monica's betrayal spread across his mahogany desk. Peter's expression grew increasingly grave as he examined each document. The login records showing my credentials accessing vendor systems during my documented time off. The bank statements revealing payments to companies registered under Monica's property. The bonus manipulation reports that Catherine had helped compile. "How long do you estimate this has been going on?" Peter asked, his voice carefully controlled. "At least 8 months, possibly longer. The earliest suspicious transaction I can definitively trace is from last March, but there may be others buried deeper in the system." Peter leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. The financial exposure alone could be significant, but the regulatory concerns. He trailed off, understanding that Medicare fraud investigations could devastate the hospital's reputation and accreditation status. "I need to involve legal counsel immediately," he continued, "and we'll need to secure all of Monica's access credentials before she arrives for her shift. Can you walk me through exactly how she gained access to your login?" I explained the evening when Monica had offered to help with vendor approvals, how she'd watched me enter my credentials, claiming she wanted to learn the process for future efficiency. What I'd interpreted as professional development had been reconnaissance for her scheme. "The sophistication suggests this wasn't opportunistic," Peter observed. She specifically targeted someone with vendor approval authority and cultivated a relationship to gain access. This was premeditated fraud. By 9 a.m., hospital security had quietly disabled Monica's badge access, and IT had flagged her accounts for monitoring. Legal counsel Diana Martinez arrived shortly after, bringing protocols for internal investigations and employee misconduct procedures. "We need to document everything before any confrontation," Diana advised. "If this becomes a criminal matter, which it likely will, given the dollar amounts involved, we need an unbroken chain of and proper procedures." The morning felt surreal. I continued my regular administrative duties while knowing that Monica was working her shift in the step-down unit, unaware that her carefully constructed scheme was unraveling. Colleagues greeted me normally, discussed patient transfers and staffing schedules, while I carried the weight of what was coming. Catherine found me during lunch break, her expression concerned. "Taylor, is everything all right? You seem distracted today." I couldn't share details of the ongoing investigation, but her support had been crucial in uncovering the truth. "Thank you for bringing those bonus discrepancies to my attention yesterday. It led to some important discoveries." "I'm glad I could help. Several nurses have been talking about the unfairness in recent evaluations. Monica always seems to know exactly what administrators want to hear during reviews." Her words carried new meaning now. Monica hadn't just been manipulating financial systems, she'd been gaming the entire performance evaluation process, possibly gathering information about review criteria to advantage herself and her allies while disadvantaging others. At 2 p.m., Peter Thompson requested Monica's presence in the administrative conference room. I watched from my office as she walked down the hallway, her stride confident and unhurried. She probably assumed it was a routine meeting about unit operations or upcoming policy changes. Diana Martinez had advised against my direct participation in the initial confrontation, citing potential conflicts of interest since my credentials had been compromised. Instead, I waited in Peter's office, monitoring the situation through carefully worded text updates. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. When Monica emerged, her face was pale, and her usual composure had cracked. Security personnel flanked her as she was escorted to collect personal belongings from her locker, her badge and hospital identification already confiscated. Peter returned to his office looking drained. She denied everything initially, then claimed she was only trying to streamline processes and reduce administrative burden. When confronted with the bank records and property registrations, she finally admitted to the vendor fraud, but insisted the bonus manipulation was unintentional. What happens now? Legal counsel is filing reports with appropriate authorities. The Financial Crimes Unit will likely want to interview you about the credential compromise. HR is conducting a comprehensive audit of all vendor relationships and bonus calculations from the past year. The afternoon brought a parade of investigators, auditors, and administrators. I provided detailed statements about Monica's access to my login credentials, the timeline of suspicious activities, and the discovery process that had revealed her scheme. Detective Sarah Williams from the Financial Crimes Unit was particularly thorough. "Healthcare fraud cases often involve complex relationships and institutional knowledge," she explained. "The fact that she specifically targeted someone with vendor approval authority suggests she'd been planning this for some time." She volunteered for additional responsibilities, always seemed eager to help with administrative tasks, I reflected. I thought she was being proactive about professional development. That's a common pattern. Fraudsters often position themselves as helpful and indispensable to gain access and avoid suspicion. Her performance in the step-down unit was probably genuine. It provided cover for the financial crimes. By evening, word had spread through the hospital despite administration's attempts at discretion. Colleagues approached me with questions I couldn't answer, their expressions mixing curiosity with concern about institutional stability. Catherine found me again as I prepared to leave. "I heard Monica was escorted out by security. Was it related to what we discussed yesterday? I can't share details, but your observations about the bonus discrepancies were very helpful to the investigation." I'm glad someone finally listened. Several of us have felt like the evaluation process wasn't fair, but Monica always had explanations that sounded reasonable. She said administrators had specific criteria that weren't widely known. The manipulation had been even more extensive than I'd realized. Monica had been using her position and access to information to create advantages for herself while making others feel inadequate or uninformed about hospital policies. As I drove home through Golden Valley's quiet streets, I reflected on the day's revelations. The woman I'd trusted as a colleague and mentor had systematically exploited that trust for financial gain. She'd used my credentials to steal from the hospital while manipulating performance evaluations to maintain her position and influence. The investigation would continue for weeks, possibly months. Financial audits would examine every vendor relationship and bonus calculation. Staff interviews would reveal the full extent of Monica's manipulation and favoritism. Regulatory agencies would scrutinize our oversight procedures and internal controls. But the immediate crisis had passed. Monica's access had been revoked, her scheme exposed, and proper authorities notified. The hospital's financial systems were being secured and audited. Justice would follow its proper course. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the institution worked to rebuild trust and strengthen safeguards against future fraud. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of suspicion and uncertainty beginning to lift.